Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar Advancing Regional Cross-Agency Collaboration During the Unforeseen Circumstances. My name is Neelu Parvinashtani and I'll be helping with facilitating today's webinar. This webinar is organized by WACARE and hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, and also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, if you don't know us already, we offer resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. On the bottom right side of your screen, you see a box called Useful Links box. You can browse through those links for resources and news. Now I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording the webinar and the recording will be available through the on-demand learning section of NOCO's website. All the attendee phones are on listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the question pod for any comments and questions. The questions will be addressed during and at the end of the webinar as appropriate. So that's all I had, and with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Scott Belcher, to start us off. Scott.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to virtually be with you. We're all adjusting. It's the first virtual seminar I've done, and so this will be a bit of an experience. I love doing these. I like the energy. We're not doing it with slides, so and I've always kind of made a rule of not using slides. I hope it works as well on a video panel. I'm sure it will. We've really intentionally selected three really important speakers for you today because we want to talk about the role that technology and collaboration play in times where we're going through crisis. And obviously, over the past several months and in the past several weeks, we've gone through some crises that we have not experienced in our lifetime. And it's taken very special leaders to help us make our way through this period. So I think you're really lucky to have the chance to listen and to learn from some folks who have been leading the country through some of these difficult times. Before we get started, I will ask each of our participants to introduce themselves and their organization. Johanna, do you want to start?
Well, sure, Scott. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Johanna Pinkerton. I am in Columbus, Ohio, where I am president and CEO of the Central Ohio Transit Authority. Pre-COVID, we were an organization of about 20 million trips a year. We cover a 562 square mile area in Central Ohio, all of Franklin County, and then portions of surrounding counties. So we're a regional transit authority that really has been focused during the last couple years on how to move mobility forward to ensure we have a seamless integration of all mobility systems in the Central Ohio area. We employ about 1,200 people. I have more than 700 operators, governed by a 13-member board appointed by public officials. But I'm really blessed to have a great corporate relationship here in Central Ohio with executives who are dealing with similar issues with digital transformation in their respective industries. We have a fleet of just over 450 vehicles, and we're working on a lot of new things here in Central Ohio, including on-demand service, putting new predictive analytics in our transportation management centers, and really dealing with a lot of innovation that, quite frankly, has been very helpful, especially the last 3 months.
Great. Thanks, Johanna. MJ? MJ, you're on mute.
About that? Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep.
So I am the new CEO here at the RTC. I've been in this role since last November. So the RTC, we are a very unique organization. We are not only the public transit provider, We are also the Metropolitan Planning Organization. We are the funding and design agency. We are also the traffic manager for the entire region. So I think we're the only agency in the United States that houses all of those functions under one roof, and it makes us very nimble. It's an awesome opportunity to collaborate with local jurisdictions in a really effective way, as well as work closely with the private sector, again, to introduce pilots and projects with all functions under one roof.
Great. And where's the RTC?
I just assumed everyone knew. We're in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada.
All right. I saw you opened up a casino yesterday.
You know that we are in phase 2 here. The governor just implemented that just the last weekend. So there are casinos that are opening up. Not all of them are there, but it's slow and steady.
Great, great. Noam? Noam, you're on mute as well.
Yeah, that's always the thing. You have to remember to unmute yourself. Hi, everyone. Happy to be joining you today. Noam Eital. I'm co-founder and CEO of Waycare Technologies. And really at the core, Waycare has been working with transportation agencies, both on the transit and traffic management side, to help leverage vast amount of data that's being collected today, but new sources of data as well, and use artificial intelligence on a cloud-based platform to be able to operationalize a lot of those data into decisions and insights. So everything from incident management all the way to congestion management and use of deep learning and predictive analytics as well to shift the conversation from a reactive approach, which is where the industry is today, to a much more proactive mitigation of how we deploy our resources, being smarter about it. And I think the interesting part that has kind of come about that's very topical for this conversation today is the role of collaboration between the agencies has been what has helped the AI and the glue of the platform become effective. So what we found is really those two things have to go together to enable a successful use cases, which is multiple agencies working together in unison on a technology perspective as well. And so looking forward to the discussion today.
But let's just, that really piques my curiosity. I think like everybody in this country, and unless you were under a rock, the last couple of weeks have been really hard for everybody in a different way, but it's been challenging. It's been challenging for us as a country. But I think clearly organizations have been challenged, and no organizations have been challenged in the same way that transportation organizations have been challenged. So you have the opportunity to sit kind of at the 10,000-foot level, working with multiple organizations around the country. And I'm kind of curious what and you're also, you're from Israel. And so I'm kind of curious, putting those two things together, what you've seen, what you've learned about this country and about how transportation is critical to the way we operate in this country and to our future.
Yeah, well, I think the Israel angle is a more difficult and long conversation, because I guess the short version is that it makes me, no, it's fine. It makes me comfortable, or I shouldn't say comfortable, it makes me familiar with conflict, as Israel has been in conflict for since its existence, right? But I think if I bring it to the conversation of what's happening here today and working with agencies across the U.S., it's really reshifted the conversation about before even these protests started, and we were more focused on the pandemic and the impact it's had, it had dire impacts on transportation agencies, both from a revenue shortfall and on transit services and ridership. And then this came about and really added a whole new lens on how we think about transportation services. And if until now there was a camp that would look at it, and you could almost say for myself, right, if I think of transit services, to me it's either a luxury or a convenience of how I get to work. For many of these communities that are lower income communities and many of those that are also Black communities, this services is actually at the core and the foundation of economic opportunity and being able to rise up, whether that's through access to education, access to workplace. And so as we start thinking about how we continue to improve our transportation services, the foundational understanding of these services as a critical slice of our community is something that I think needs to be in the back of our minds more than ever, and this has just brought it even more to the forefront. The other thing is, just very briefly on the technology side, is this hasn't really been so much about technology, but I think, as I was mentioning maybe in our conversation previous, it's not that racism suddenly appeared, but rather that it's being filmed, and that obviously, as Will Smith famously said, but I think the key there is that we cannot avoid it anymore, and that's something that it shows you when technology is used right, some of that power that it can have to mobilize entire communities and a whole movement, which is what we're seeing now. I think the last thing on that, and I'll be interested to hear both Johanna and MJ's perspective too, is the fact that words aren't enough. And so I think as much as I'm speaking here, it's inevitable to acknowledge that we are 4 white people sitting here on a panel. And so for us, what matters most is what actions we take moving forward, not just the words that we say. And that's really what we'll be measured by. So all the words we say here, really it's more about what policies, what actions we put in place moving forward 2020 and beyond as well.
Great, thank you, Noam. Joanna, I know Columbus had experienced a lot of turmoil over the last 2 weeks, and I know CODA has been at the center of a lot of it. You want to talk a little bit about, share a little bit about that with us?
Well, sure, allow me to thank you, Scott, for asking the question of how everyone's doing. I hope that everyone understands that that question applies beyond the 4 people on this panel. You know, the topic of racial injustice is a really personal one for our community and for our organization, considering the people we serve and also our own employees. My organization, overall diversity is 71% when you look at racial, gender, and orientation. That's something we take very, we take great pride in that. And about a year ago, my first year here at CODA, we undertook a strategic planning process, and there was a really big debate about what the fundamental pillars of ours should be moving forward. And one of them happens to be data and analytics, which I'm sure will come up a lot today. But equity, diversity, and inclusion was initially one of the pillars. It was a 5th pillar. And it became very clear when we discussed with external stakeholders, customers, and our employees as well. It can't be a separate pillar. It has to be at the center of everything we do. And it is when you look at, to Noam's point, not just what we say. So when you read the plan, you're going to see that in there, but it's in the center. And when we make decisions now as a team, we vet everything through the lens of, is it equitable and is it inclusive? Transportation has, a very ugly history, even
Right.
down to the alignment of our roads.
Right.
So if we just keep optimizing the same system over and over, by nature, we will just be continuing to make old policies just a little bit better. And I think the discussion here that's coming out in volumes across all makes and beliefs is that it's fundamentally flawed and has to be rebuilt. And so that really resonates with our team. because creating a safe space for employees and customers to talk about how equitable something is brings a lot of conversations up. And I'd like to address what Noam said about actions. It is really challenging, I think, as a leader, and when I think about even this webinar, people focused on operations when you have things you have to do. We have service to deliver, but I had 10 days of demonstrations which sometimes turned violent in nature, where we had to make sure we were protecting a customer and also protecting our employees, and doing reroutes and things in the moment operationally, that, decisions that had to be called, audibles in the field. And you do all that, but you have to do it thinking about people first. And we came out very clearly the very first night reassuring our employees that we as a leadership team, a very diverse leadership team, that we will protect them, we will stand up for them, we will stand up for their rights, and that we are joining every other company in this Central Ohio region to go on the record that we know, in asking legislation to be passed, that we are actually at a point of public health crisis because of racism. And so that really, I'm looking forward to that having actionable steps moving forward where it changes the decisions that get made, everything from infrastructure funding to how we're providing services to people in every neighborhood.
Well, I know you're on the board of ITS America. I think it'll be really some interesting conversations, because I also know Salida from LA DOT is there. And one of the things that has struck me is when she talks in terms of reparations, when she talks of reparations, she uses reparations and transportation in the same sentence, And that's something I've never heard before. And she talks about that when she goes into communities. And it's really powerful. So I suspect you'll have some fascinating conversations there. MJ, what about in Vegas? You deal with a lot of big events all the time. Has it been different?
Yes and no. But what I do want to comment on both Johanna and Noam. It really is about moving forward, about action. As an agency, well, as a public transit agency, for anyone that operates public transit, equitable access is inherent to what we do. It's the DNA. That's what we do. We traditionally move folks that are disenfranchised or from lower income communities of color. If you get on a bus, you're going to see real life. If you get in your car and you drive from your neighborhood to your job, back to your neighborhood or to your friends, your world may just be one color. But if you were to ride public transit, you see that access that we're providing, particularly to those folks, again, that may be disenfranchised, it's getting to jobs. And for our customers, many times here in our service industry, it's getting to more than one job. It is getting to education. It is getting to healthcare. In those areas, in communities where, again, it's a lower income, communities of color, many times you can't find a grocery store there. And so if you want to find even healthy food to keep food for your family, again, it's public transit and how you get there. And so I agree, words they sound great, right? It's very meaningful, but unless there's action behind it, and so certainly how we operate as an agency, equity is a big part of what we do, but it's listening to our customers and how they want their needs, their transportation needs. We are the planning organization, and so how we work with the local jurisdictions and planning communities, that has to be part of the conversation. So, yes, as far as Las Vegas and the events like Columbus, like many cities, there were protests here, and some of them did get violent. We had to, as we always do in transit, we had to react very quickly. Safety was, as Johanna mentioned, was number one. Safety for the drivers, safety for the customers, for all the folks on the buses, and then of course safety for the folks who were in the street. So we used technology to move very quickly. Again, as the public transit agency and the traffic management center, we're able to do some things a little more quickly that way. But definitely a time to listen, and a time to understand, and a time really to continue to put words into action.
So I know each of you, and I talk with you all. So I know that your worlds have been rocked, and I know the jobs that you took are not the jobs that you have today. And so I'm really curious about what is the most interesting challenge that you have today. And I'm sure it's very different than it was 4 months ago. And how are you using technology, and how are you working with other organizations in ways that you might not have been 4 months ago? And Jay, why don't you start?
You mean challenging, like aside from being a new CEO with a pandemic? Hey, just another day at the office. But many of you probably on the call know my beloved ex-boss, Tina Quigley, and she really started our agency on a path where evolve or you're going to die on the vine. And again, as I mentioned, because we wear so many hats, we're able to do some things that others can't do. One project that I'll speak to, pre-COVID, certainly Las Vegas was one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and construction was and still is one of our major economic industries. So where there is construction, there are orange cones. And where there are orange cones, there are really frustrated drivers who quite clearly saw that there was a lack of coordination among different agencies and utility companies. And Tina used to say that orange cones were taking up lanes paid for by taxpaying citizens, and she's right. I mean, it's our job to ensure that we are efficient and effective and coordinated in how we take a lane or wreak havoc in someone's daily commute. So we pursued a way to find construction zones, those orange cones, throughout the valley. We wanted to find them in real time. We wanted to be able to identify those work zones in real time. And so we partnered with the City of Las Vegas on a pilot project where we are working with various vendors and their softwares. The goal is to ensure that the effort helps motorists and traffic engineers know what's ahead and exactly where those work zones are. So some of the smart zone work that we're testing right now, we have the ability to know where all of the orange cones are throughout the valley in real time. And that is thousands and thousands of data set points. How do you take all that data and aggregate it in such a way that it's easy to use? And that's been a real challenge working with the vendors. We've been able to aggregate the data and put those traffic alerts on a map that not only the public can access, but also the jurisdictions that are leading those projects. It's an accountability, another layer of accountability where they can go in real time, see if those projects are being performed as they were supposed to. Think of a barricade plan. It's been permitted by the City of Las Vegas. Are they in fact following protocol? We're also able to see in real time where the work zones are, and then we can push that out through our partnership with Waze so that, again, motorists know if a lane's being taken because there's a work zone in that traffic lane that they can be rerouted either by Waze, or they can make a decision on behalf of themselves on what's the best way to get from point A to point B. So really, by working with these private sector companies, we have the ability to see where construction cones are in real time. And we can see when those work trucks are taking up lanes in real time and send the information to Waze to notify their users. And Noam, actually, I don't know if you're aware, Noam is actually an RTC employee, he and his company. Waycare is a big part of what we do, and I hope he talks about that. I certainly will. So it's a pilot program right now. The goal is to we have the City of Las Vegas on board. The goal is to work with other jurisdictions to move it from pilot to program, and then to create specifications so that every job that is funded by the RTC uses these specs and will incorporate technology in and around the work zones and the orange cones.
Great. That sounds really interesting. You're also using a little bit of technology to be able to identify other indicators of construction as well, which is pretty interesting. Johanna, what about you? I know you've got a number of technology priorities right now. What do you want? What would you like to talk about?
Well, similar to MJ, the concept of data and how you actually analyze it and then what you use it for has been a priority for us. I mentioned we have 4 pillars under our new strategic plan, and better use of data and analytics is one of the 4. So it influences everything we do, including existing programs and the new programs that we should launch. And so it's interesting to draw some correlations between pre-COVID and currently during the pandemic, because there was never a better time to be focused on the ability to harness your data and have analytics to inform you about making decisions. It was the right thing to do pre-COVID, and it became critical. So, for example, we've started a new innovation division, and we have a new chief innovation officer who's phenomenal, comes to us from the aviation industry. Interestingly enough, where when you look at how you transfer skills as far as what's best for the customer and mapping that customer journey, we've done a lot of customer surveying and segmentation, and we're coming to understand that wayfinding is a real issue for us here in Central Ohio. We've been a predominantly single occupant vehicle community for since interstates were built. And as we increased ridership pre-COVID, really finding the wayfinding and making sure that the trip that was planned for the customer was seamless. And so we did a transit system redesign about 2 years ago, where for the first time in 47 years, instead of just running fixed routes, we actually analyzed, sounds incredible, right? This is what we should be doing all the time. But this is how transit used to work. There were routes that were designed based on where the road was, and you were optimizing how the wheels moved. And instead, we looked at where the jobs are and where the housing has been built. We're a city similar to Las Vegas on the growing extensively. We're expected to go from a region of 2 million to almost 4 million in the next 2 decades. So instead of just looking at the roads, we looked at where do people live and where do they work. So we did a transit system redesign. And from that redesign, we normally then reroute or reanalyze about 3 times a year, about every 120 days, just to make sure seasonal school. So the ability to look at that ridership data, traffic counts, people counts, has been really important. And then lo and behold, a pandemic comes along, and we've had to change our service 10 times in 3 months. So we used to do it 3 times a year, and we've had to do it 10 times in the last 3 months.
You did with spreadsheets, right?
We used to do it with spreadsheets. We used to, right?
Yeah.
And now having the data, and so as we switched to things like cashless, we did used to accept cash prior to the pandemic. We will be transitioning all riders, to cashless very soon. And that should provide us with even more data of where people are moving now, because what we're finding in our community, employers are going to have different structures of how they come back to work. Some employers are saying, I will never have more than 50% occupancy in a building. Others are saying, we're going to work split shifts. And so we're going to have to redesign our system every time companies decide, based on public health concerns, how their employees should move. Just in the last 3 weeks, we have surveyed more than 350 companies representing 55,000 employees. We're working with the school systems and the nonprofits who've seen an increase of almost 20% in people needing food assistance or some type of unemployment or social safety net. The schools here, all 26 school locations, have amazing sites set up where anyone, no questions asked, under the age of 19 can receive a meal at breakfast or lunch. So we prioritized and built new routes around food access. Just yesterday, it looks like I had 200 kids who boarded our transit system, no questions asked, no charge for the ride, to go get a meal. So really looking at our data sets and determining from a policy perspective what will be the priorities next. I think in the mobility industry, it used to be how many riders or how many drivers were moving, how fast was the speed, what was the speed, the throughput, and now we're looking at outcomes of what did that person accomplish as opposed to just the speed that the vehicle was traveling.
Well, I love the anecdote you told me once where during one of these rerouting exercises that you were walking around the tables talking to people who were doing rerouting, and there were 4 middle-aged men talking about rerouting, and you asked them if they'd ever been to the area they were rerouting to, and you knew the area, so you knew the answer, and they said no, and you asked them to go drive it at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And they did, and they came back, and interestingly, they rerouted it in a different way.
Yeah.
And
So
looking
at different outcomes, right. They had selected a place where, there just wasn't adequate lighting. We have a lot of manufacturing down in that portion of town, and when you are making $11 an hour and get off at 11 o'clock at night and are alone and need to get on public transit, you want different visual cues that tell you that your vehicle's coming, that there's a light and a bench, and that there's going to be a safe place for you to land.
I just thought that was wonderful. So Noam, from your perspective, what are your clients asking you to do differently than they were 4 months ago?
I think the interesting thing is the trend of what happened, right? Specifically looking at pandemic, where traffic was on an increase before, incidents was on the rise, or at least that plateaued in terms of fatalities. And then we saw a drop, frankly, like we've never seen in the history of the U.S. So between February, March, and April, the data that we were looking at from our customers, the drop in the number of incidents and traffic was one of the sharpest declines in the history of the U.S. in terms of month over month. And in many ways, if you were to remove the pandemic, that's great news. It's kind of what you wish for. I live in LA, and so driving from the valley where I live to Santa Monica suddenly became a enjoyable experience. But I think what quickly happened, an economist would call like a V-shape recovery. In a negative way, I would say that's happening already on the transportation side for various reasons in terms of congestion and incidents. So we saw incidents already as states start opening up, starting to spike back up. And even though workplaces are encouraging more remote working, what is happening is that more people are preferring to use their own vehicle, and single occupancy has gone up pretty significantly. So to bring it back to kind of your question, I think for us, it's kind of been a lot about helping agencies just to amplify what both Johanna and MJ have said, understanding the data and turning that into quick decisions. During the pandemic and even now, it's been about quick decisions. How do I quickly understand what's going on and make a decision? But moving forward a little more long-term, it's how do I build a more nimble operational solutions that can adjust to this varying degrees of shifts in traffic and incident and response. And a lot of that, from our perspective, has been about shifting the conversation also from a budget perspective, because we can't deny that across the country budgets have been slashed based on fuel taxes going down and other sales tax. So how do you become smarter about spending your investment from a public transportation perspective? And from our perspective, a lot of that comes at looking at technology and data as a substitute to cement and hard infrastructure. And so if you were to pave a mile of a road, that would cost you, $10 million, and I may be understating the cost there. If you took that and applied that to data and technology to try and get to the same use case, your return would be significantly improved. And so a lot of that has been in the focus of our focus with customers on how do you start looking at connected vehicle data, at connectivity for mobility, to bring it into applications for incident management, for syncing trends at operations, for looking at various congestion metrics that don't necessarily mean you have to go the old route of putting sensors in the ground and reshuffling your whole maintenance budgets as it happens today.
Yeah, if I can add to
please.
Prioritization of how data can actually help you from an operational standpoint spend your dollars more wisely. So his firm, along with a couple other firms here in Columbus, who said, at the beginning of the pandemic, what do you need? And we said we need help analyzing our data. We are still at a reduced capacity here in Columbus. We are deliberately suppressing our service. We're at about 53% capacity right now, intentionally, until we understand from public health officials how we should bring our service back. And in addition to that, we are social distancing and limiting our vehicles to 20 customers per vehicle. And so, as you might imagine, on our higher capacity routes, sometimes there's a 21st person or a 22nd. I mean, you might have 10 people standing there saying, I can't get on. And rather than putting them in a situation where they have to wait 10 or 15 minutes for the next vehicle, we've had some great analysis of, automatically notifying our dispatch systems that there are people who are being passed up, and automatically deploying what we call dynamic service. That didn't exist at CODA 110 days ago. And so within 3 to 5 minutes, another vehicle comes along and picks people up. And we call them sweeps. We are picking up almost 1,200 people a day on sweeps that would have been left behind had we not had the ability to count, to understand our passenger counts and then our vehicle, our capacity limits. We didn't have to widen the road. We're just making better use of that infrastructure that's there with sensors technology and the ability to evaluate whether or not there are people waiting on the system.
Hey, Scott, and I do want to, you talked about the traffic volumes pre-COVID compared to, right in the heart of the pandemic for us really here in March and April. And talking to the traffic management team yesterday, they shared something interesting about that. So you think, great, less congestion on the road, that's a good thing. Well, we learned through the data that less congestions on both the freeways and the arterials meant that folks were going much faster, so traveling excessive speeds because they could, and as a result, the crashes, the incidents that were occurring were much more serious. And so, that we took that data, and because we're in a partnership with the Nevada Highway Patrol, was able to share that information with them. But I thought that was it's an unfortunate outcome of having traffic volumes to the levels they were here in Las Vegas. Again, excessive speeds and more serious crashes were occurring.
Yeah, the fatality per VMT is way up, and I know Nevada's a Vision Zero state, so that's a real issue. For the audience, you can see why we've gathered these three people together, and we clearly will enjoy our time together and make great use of it. If you want to participate, please send in your questions. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going because we've got a lot to talk about. The four of us don't get together as often as we'd like, especially during these kind of crisis periods. So now's the time to start typing in your questions, and we'll try to get to them. I want to circle back to something that you each have touched on. The three of you are data geeks in your own way, and I know that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about business intelligence. We're in an industry that is notoriously bad at it, haven't figured it out yet. I mean, I've seen some of the reports that you guys get, and they're not necessarily what you need or what you want. So I guess I'd like to talk about how we change that. I mean, MJ, you come out of the private sector. You spent most of your career in the private sector, and you have a different level of expectation. I mean, Johanna, you're in an organization that has a ton of data in data silos, and until you got there, you had a data scientist that you kept in the basement and fed pizza under the door. And now he's seeing the light of day. You've built a team of people who are trying to make sense of the data that you've got, and you're really getting there. And Noam, your business is trying to make sense out of transportation departments and really all the players' data sets. So how do we take what we have, where we are as an industry, and move it really into this decade, so that we're at par with other industries? Because my view, and this is my view, I'm not talking for anybody else other than myself, this is an area that we lag. And I ran 2 transportation organizations myself for over a decade, and we weren't any better. So I guess, Noam, why don't you start? You work with a lot of organizations, and you see this every day.
Yeah, so I think first, I would shift the focus from data to insights. And so if I were to look at the flow of what that means, if you start with data as just the raw aggregation of data points together, then you have information, which is that aggregation of those data points, and then you have insights at the tail end of it. And insights is really what Johanna and MJ and what all the transportation agencies are looking for, because frankly what's happening now is that transportation agencies are swimming in data. Oftentimes it's siloed, usually it is. There's some silos that exist. A lot of that has to do with legacy technologies and how systems were built. So if you think about a traffic management center, you'll have a camera system that has a software on top of it attached to the hardware, but it doesn't talk to the road sensors and it doesn't talk to other agencies. So you create this rich environment of data that's sitting in silos, but one part of it is just lifting those silos up. And a key to that really is using cloud environments that are agnostic. So if something new comes about, let's say micromobility and scooters that just came 2017, you know how to incorporate it. You're not limited by how you're able to put that data in. But the trick and the hard part is to say, okay, how do I turn this vast amount of data into operational decision points? And obviously that's where we look at AI as a tool for that, because it's one thing to look at Excel sheets that are looking at thousands of rows. When you start bringing in connected vehicle data as well, you're starting to talk about terabytes of data. And so then it becomes unmanageable for a human to be able to use that data and actually glean any insights from it. And so really our focus has been, let's start with the use case and the problem. What's the insight you're trying to get to? Okay, I have Vision Zero, I have fatalities that I want to reduce. I want to respond better to incidents. I want to better improve my transit services and connect them to the traffic operations. Now let's reverse engineer that to what data can we go and look and analyze to get to that solution. So that's been a big focus, because a lot of agencies will tout and kind of hammer on, we need more data, we need to focus on data. And what I often come and say is, I actually don't think your focus should be on data. It should be on the insights that come from it and building capabilities to leverage the data that you have.
Yeah, great.
MJ, what about you? Where are you at in this question?
So, we put our abacus down here at the RTC. I'll tell you that coming from the private sector, when I joined the RTC, I learned that in the public sector, particularly in the transportation side of the house, proprietary software is the thing, right? It's like getting into a marriage and there's no option for divorce. It's pretty horrible. And that proprietary relationship, many times the technology becomes static and old and quite frankly useless and very expensive. And it didn't give us the freedom to enter into partnerships with companies that were new and emerging and forward-thinking. And so, again, here at the RTC, we're a big fan of pilots. But I think sometimes, to Noam's point, talk about a data hangover. I mean, just way too much data. And we found through these pilots, you have to be humble. You have to be able to raise your hand and say, I am not the expert here. We don't know what we don't know. and look for partnerships where you can build a trusting relationship. And I will use an example. Sorry, no, I'm going to talk about you a little bit here. Waycare came to the RTC a few years ago and said, hey, they're this humble little startup company out of Israel. Hey, we think you have a problem, and we think we can help you. But this is what made a company. This is what if I were to give advice to anybody, is you look for a partnership that includes, while Waycare, we certainly did not have any understanding of the complexity of their technology. I don't think they really had complete knowledge of what we were doing in our traffic operations center. And they literally moved in. I mean, they embedded themselves in our operations for months, so that both of us said, we don't know this, so we need to get smarter here. That was public sector. The private sector said, well, we think we know a lot about this, but we probably need to learn more. And rather than going back to Israel or going to the other side of the United States, they invested time so that aside from saying, hey, we can help you with your data, it's that insight that Noam talked about. What does it mean? And you also we've learned a lot in our partnerships with the private sector, that some of the things that we're doing, so the data that we have, way too much data, very hard to extrapolate the data, very hard to gain meaning from the data, and then using the data. I mean, we can tell our boards that we're undergoing and entering into this very exciting pilot, but if we don't know what we want out of it, we can just say, well, we've got a lot of data, the pilot ends, the private sector walks away, and then we're left kind of where we were. So I think it's that understanding what you don't know on both sides, I think, and creating that trust so that really that data does become very insightful, and you're able to use it in a very meaningful way to solve for problems in your community.
Johanna?
Yeah, I really appreciate MJ mentioning the fact that I think the transportation industry, especially transit, has been kind of strangle-held by this proprietary software, proprietary hardware, coming from a research background in management and academia and the DOT, that didn't make sense to me either. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about, to answer your question, is it has to come from the top. Like, you have to make a decision. So whether you're in a DOT, whether you're running a business, if you're in the transit industry, you have to decide that this is a priority, and it is as ubiquitous and necessary as the ability to turn the lights on when you come in the building. And then you have to empower your people, because saying that we prioritize data and want to have better insights didn't magically turn our agency into a fully capable organization. We had to bring people on board, bring talent in. We're looking at how we redo training and how we skill people up. And then we let them understand that it is within their domain to question everything. I'm a big questioner, and I think that if you ask enough questions, you'll finally come to the answers that you're looking for. And I think about some of the things we've done, like benchmarking and partnering. So MJ and her predecessor, Tina, invited us out, showed us some of the AI work that they're doing, and immediately I thought, well, there's no reason this can't work in Columbus. And thankfully, we have partnerships here amongst my 14 suburbs and major city and 5 counties, where the police and the patrol are willing to let us work on the transportation network with them to say, if I do this, it's going to be safer, it's going to mean better travel times for my customers as transit, for people in single occupant vehicles. And another example that comes to mind is, we really prioritize providing service to our aging population and our disabled population. So 2 of your most vulnerable populations who rely very heavily on the transit system, and we have ADA, what we call mainstream vehicles that pick people up. We also have an extensive mass transit system, and if we can make it easier for people to navigate, then it changes the economic mobility that they have and the freedom of their own life. And part of the Smart City grant that the City of Columbus was awarded They came to us and said, hey, we want to work on this cognitive disabilities app. And, you know, the initial response would have normally been, that won't work with our software that we use for travel planning or for payment on the vehicle. So we committed to getting around that, did a lot of work with the National Institutes of Health, and now we have, you know, a deployable app that can be scaled to any transit agency in the nation that helps a person who normally would have to have a caregiver or a provider or their own individual driver. You know, the app was just recently featured in a few national publications where the app is developed specifically for them and the needs that they have. Like maybe I have challenges with eyesight. Maybe I have cognition issues. And so it gives me different instructions than you or I receive in Google Maps. You know, in that model, in that world where technology has been developed for the masses, it assumes that everybody has the same ability. And so a commitment from the top that you are going to find ways to develop other systems to be inclusive for people, I think is really important, because it's not just going to happen just because good companies exist. It really comes from the leadership.
So
Scott, if I may,
just
one line, I think, because I think it's worth noting to this conversation and to this discussion today. Johanna and MJ mentioned it, but across the country, really, the problem is almost every DOT and transportation agency has a good working relationship for the most part with other agencies. But at the layer of data and technology collaboration, that silo we talked about, I just want to clarify, a lot of it lies between the different agencies that don't have the ability to share the data. And I think on the call today, both RTC and MJ and Johanna have done something quite different from the rest of the country, where they're taking a step forward, not only as their own agency to bring the data to the forefront, but to say, to go out to their community and say, okay, all the agencies that are relevant to us together, let's work and partner, whether that's the police, whether it's maintenance crews, whether it's traffic management, transit, and bringing that together. I think that's a key part of it, so that collaboration element as well.
But that collaboration isn't, I mean, I think it's important to note, and you all three have the scars to prove it, and that's that collaboration doesn't necessarily come easy or immediately. Sometimes it comes with, you have to show them that it's in their best interest. I mean, MJ or Noam, you can talk about how you got the Highway Patrol to participate in Las Vegas, and now they're the strongest advocate. I mean, MJ, why don't you just tell that story, because I think that's a very telling story, and I think it's really a good one.
It's a great example of, again, change is not easy, and if you've been doing things a certain way, you know, why change them? And that was really part of the mindset here. And I think, again, I'll go back to the fact that our partnership, the partner was here. They really embedded themselves in our traffic management center, so that, you know, we co-locate with Nevada Highway Patrol. So that made it easy. That's certainly a benefit. But it was they could see for themselves as we were testing the benefits. So imagine being a Highway Patrol. The only way that you were going to get dispatched to an accident was through their call center, which again is we co-locate. And so it worked for them. It worked for them. They're like, this is how everyone's done it. It's working. We're good. When they realized that the technology could actually improve their response time, you know, these men and women that go out and try to keep everybody safe, I think that in and of itself, the fact that their core function could be drastically changed with having real-time information, even in their mobile phones now. They can actually make decisions on behalf of the community based on this technology. And I think, I mean, no, you were there. You might have a little more insight as well, because you had boots on the ground. But it was one of those, they can't imagine going back to their DOS screens they had in their patrol cars to having real-time information on a terminal, again, even on their through their mobile phones.
Yeah, I think the interesting part there, and this is not unique to a police agency or to a service patrol or to maintenance, it's all kind of similar, right? where they've been using, a lot of them have been using the same technology or doing the same processes for a long time, and then you come about with a different operation. So specifically what MJ is discussing here is how they respond to incidents. And so when we came and worked with RTC, we looked at the process of how you identify an incident. And today, really across the country, it's a manual process that either someone calls 911 or an operator sees it on the screen. And using artificial intelligence, you're able to use historical data to train algorithms on particular roadways and then start tying that in with real-time data to automatically understand the anomalies as they're happening. And all of that said, all that fun stuff about technology, the operators at the end didn't care about. What they cared about is, are you improving the way I respond to the incident? So when we came to them, it was less about the beginning of what I said, but more about show me the proofs in the pudding. So when we started using the system and they're responding to an incident that came from a waycare system, and then a few minutes later, they're getting the 911 call after, letting them know of the incident, they're already at the site, that's when you get those aha moments from some of the troopers that maybe would have been hesitant before, when you actually start showing them the benefit of being able to respond sooner, clear the road quicker, get someone to the hospital faster. And that was the beginning of the process where we kind of got them to be a true partner to us.
Okay, so we've got about 3 or 4 minutes to wrap it up, and I'm going to be completely unfair because I'm going to ask you guys to answer. So Johanna, I'm going to ask you to answer how you're thinking about people with disabilities as you go through your transition. And I know you've got some of the smartest people dealing with paratransit. I've been really impressed with your team there, and how you're thinking about that as you go forward, and then any other parting words of wisdom for the crowd. So if you want to start.
Sure. Well, specifically when it comes to disabilities, I think it's really important to acknowledge that you don't know everything. You don't know everything, period. What I have found in a career that has spanned DOT, automotive, and now transit is that we uniquely tend to think that we know everything because we know how to run things well. I mean, we know how to run them. We are very focused here. We have external advisory panels, the Ohio Council on Aging, our regional planning commissions, National Church Residences, the largest provider of aging in place housing, is headquartered here. So we tap into the people who are actually experts. You know, we know how to move things, but we need to understand the voice of the customer that we're trying to address. So that's been a great help to us to have people like that who actually sit on advisory boards for us. We do the same not only for the disabled community, aging community, we do the same for the business community. And with all the major development going on in Central Ohio, we also have a forum where commercial and residential developers can work with us. So we start the process early instead of letting the whole process happen and then us trying to design to it. And then we benchmark and learn from other agencies. I know that being a federally regulated agency, you tend to feel like you're stuck with whatever the rules are. My team knows that I'm a beg forgiveness type person instead of an ask for permission. So when we have an idea, we take it to our regulators. We take it to FTA. You know, when we thought we would do a slightly different bent on the AI proposal that they had overseen and approved in Las Vegas, we wanted to do it Columbus style. We just told them it's going to be different, and these are the different outcomes we're hoping to have. But I do find an incredible willingness amongst agencies to share. So if I learn something, and I do think this is unique in transit, we'll share it. You know, it's not proprietary. We're not going to charge you. And we do a lot of benchmarking trips where we've had other agencies here and vice versa. So we just share what we've learned. And so I think getting down that the curve and through that technical readiness level is a really easy way to use outsiders to get your agency in shape.
Great, thank you. Noah, as your parting words of wisdom, how would would you advise other companies who want to work with agencies? We have a question about how do you, that working with the FDA can be pretty hard and pretty strict given their governance rules. How have you figured out ways to get around those restrictions? Not get around them in the wrong way, but figured out how to work within them.
Yeah, getting around is the wrong way to. I think so. Two things. I'll kind of quick parting words, and I'll address the question first, I guess. Regarding procurement, it's pretty straightforward. You have to have a solution that actually solves a real problem that the agency has. If you're manufacturing a problem, then you're going to manufacture a solution, and it just doesn't work well together. So the problem or opportunity, it can be a problem or an opportunity, has to exist within the agency, and then proving your trustworthiness, which is a key element that's often, I think, forgotten and hard to do by private sector. That doesn't come easy with the public sector. So that's one thing. Just on kind of parting notes, I think worth mentioning for all of us here, 2020 been a pretty jarring year. And for myself, as someone that's had, my second daughter born 2 weeks ago, I look at this year as a historic opportunity in transportation for a restart. And I hope we don't miss this opportunity, because we can easily overlook it and just go back to the ways we did in the past. But transportation needs to go almost a complete overhaul from a perspective of what it means to manage your network with connected vehicles. What does it mean when autonomous vehicles will come about? What does transit look like? Does it continue to look like with fixed routes and large buses, or does it shift to more on demand? And I think that these conversations were happening before the pandemic, but we're just this kind of slow transition. Right now, there's almost this restart opportunity that I really hope that agencies across the U.S. grab it and run with it.
Great, thank you. MJ, parting words?
Well, thanks for having me today. But I actually, I was going to go over NOMA. This is call it clean slate kind of moment. I think, again, pre-COVID, we were getting ready to introduce new service to our community, very fast-growing population here in Las Vegas. We've taken financially just a punch to the gut. I mean, it's going to take a long time for us to get back to where we were. So we've just got to be very smart. I speak, I'm sure, for every transit agency and public agency. We've got to be very smart in how we use our dollars. We've got to be very clear in what we're trying to solve for. And I think there's some freedom to looking at the way that we deliver service a little differently, because it's, everything's on the table now. And there is a bit of freedom to that we're going to really tap into, because it isn't necessarily about the 60-foot bus or the way that we've always done things. We're going to use this opportunity to be better. And